Hello and welcome back! Following from my previous video on the Inspired Architect, we are back with an Inspired Builder this time. Again, this deck was inspired by Wilfie's world-winning deck, CI deck, running Reverse the Counts. Now that's a card I've overlooked in the post-core 2 rotation cycle, and having looked at it now, it's a very interesting card and I want to make it work. So here's my spin of it. First thing I noticed is that Reverse the Counts obviously belongs in Wayland. For many good reasons, not least including the fact that the two cards that synergize most well with it, Brian Stinson and Dedication Ceremony, both are in Wayland. At 3 influence apiece, you really want these two cards, and hence you've got to play Wayland. Unfortunately, this comes at a cost. You do not have the clearances in faction to leverage on the Stinson, so no redonkulous triggers on ultraviolet clearance to gain 10 credits and draw 4 cards. And even if you splash it, you can't leverage on an expanded hand size because you're not cerebral imaging. So, the question is, how do you leverage on the economic advantage by Stinsoning IPOs and hedge funds to gain money? Well, one thing we can do is to build this. A strong bastion that is full of expensive ice, and we are gonna make the runner pay for it. Run through the remote multiple times and fuel our economy. Reverse accounts is going to be the new account siphon for corps, as it's gonna make it very expensive for the runner to run through, and you are profiting off of it with Brian Stinson. Whenever you install a card in the remote, whether it be an agenda or one of your assets or upgrades, you're always winning with this deck as long as your ice is taxing enough, hence the priority constructions to get those advanced colossuses and firewalls down efficiently. When a card drops in the remote, one of these things happen. You either score an agenda, which brings you closer to winning the game, you bankrupt the runner. If they decide to not contest your reverse accounts, well, they're gonna lose their money. You could set up a Batty scoring remote, which makes it all the more secure to score your next agenda. Or, in the case that the runner does decide to run your remote, they break your ice and they break their back while doing so, and you get Stinson triggers anyway. Sure, what they're running on might just be an agenda if you're unlucky, but this deck can afford to give up 1 or 2 agendas at times if it means getting a Stinson trigger to increase your defenses. Let's head right into the game. I know you're very excited, and I sure am. Our opponent today is playing Smoke, and this means we need to double down on the speed. We have to go fast. So when I see this opening hand, agendas in hand, and an end run ice to begin things off, I couldn't help but to keep it. These were 5 playable cards in my opening hand. 2 money cards, 2 agendas to score. Oh, make it 3 money cards and an end run ice. To hell with indexings and data minings. We need to score these agendas before our opponent assembles their rig. It's plain and simple. You can't compete against Haley in the late game. Period. While we watch our opponent play out their turn and actually end up stealing my Oaktown because they managed to get 11 credits by their third click, let's talk about some of my deck building choices that did not come into play in this particular game, but show why I'm playing certain powerful cards all the time in my videos. Firstly, the economy suite. Why we play Beanstalk is simple. With Beanstalk and IPO in your opening hand, you can play Beanstalk Ice IPO for a standard turn 1 opening, which allows you to play a turn 1 IPO, which you would only otherwise be able to if you draw your early hedge fund. Another thing to note is the reason why we play Oaktown, 3 Oaktowns in all of these decks, is because Oaktown is the only agenda that you can push out on turn 2 behind an expensive end run like Ho'em. If it were any other agenda like Atlas, you can't score the Atlas on turn 2. Because even if, say, my opponent wasn't able to get into the Ho'em this turn, I wouldn't be able to score the Atlas because I spent all my money rezzing the Ho'em. So this is why Oaktown is such a powerful agenda, and is why I chose to push it instead of the Atlas. Of course, this all didn't matter because my opponent now stole the Oaktown. Going down into Stinson range, unfortunately, I do not have a Stinson with me. So barring a top deck Stinson, which did not happen, if I top deck a Stinson, my turn would be Beanstalk, install Stinson, and use Stinson on Beanstalk. Not the best trigger on Stinson, but at least it lets me use it. Anyway, I didn't even draw the Stinson, so that wasn't relevant. And now we see Aesop's come out. So now I know my opponent is on Aesop's Haley. Not that I didn't know it last turn. Once they installed Cash, I knew that the restricted card was going to be Aesop's. So, perfect opportunity for me to set up the Atlas here with 2 enderruns. Again, this is why I run lots of enderrun eyes of differing types. With Barrier and Code Gate on my remote, both ending the run, I was fairly confident this Atlas would be mine. So even though I conceded the early Oak Town for 2 points, I'm going to get the more powerful 2-point agenda in Atlas. Unfortunately, the open R&D, because I went so fast trying to rush on my remote, my opponent did get the indexing off, and now they're up 4-2. Not exactly an ideal situation. Note that if I got the Atlas out 1 turn earlier, I could have disrupted the indexing with a use of the Atlas token. Again, not very relevant here, but again, a powerful reason to play Whaler nowadays is to thwart indexing with an Atlas token. My opponent installs Harbinger, another interesting card, works very well with Aesop's and Inti, so they can actually siege my remote now. Not that that's going to matter, because I need to find an agenda first, and I know that the next 4 cards on my deck are not agendas, thanks to indexing. I find a Thithonium here. Interesting. Okay, so I have 2 choices. It goes on R&D or it goes on the remote. There's no point protecting HQ here. There are no agendas in hand to hide. I decided to hold a Thithonium in hand so that I wouldn't reveal its identity to my opponent, make it a bit harder for them to guess where it is. More importantly, to give me more options on my next turn, where I'm probably in a better position to determine whether the Thithonium is better on R&D or the remote. So this game is going super fast. This is only turn 5 already, and 3 agendas are already out of circulation in the agenda score areas. We both want to go fast, it seems. My opponent is contesting my remote like crazy, and I haven't found my Stinson. Not that I really need it, given my credit pool right now. Reverse accounts, interesting. Okay, so at this point, I'm not very sure if my opponent actually saw the reverse accounts on the indexing. If they did, it would have to be the last card. I don't really know, but in any case, I'm going to play it very standard. I'm going to install advanced reverse accounts in my remote and drop the Thithonium on it because I'm going to make this remote very expensive for my opponent to contest. So indeed, they are going to go for it, playing a cash SMC, cashing in on a lot of cash, and they're going to run the remote. That's going to be very expensive because they will be breaking the Thithonium with Inti. Thankfully for them, they've actually set out the data sucker, so this is not all bad. My opponent must have seen this coming and they're willing to contest the remote. Starting with 14 credits on the start of their turn, they're now going down to a very low credit level. Definitely within Stinson range, unfortunately. Not low enough that they can't trash the reverse accounts. They're actually very smart. Let me fire the Horton once again. So while I'm gaining money, they actually finish the run on 3 credits, allowing them to actually trash the reversed accounts and prevent me from leaving it on the table as a threat. Now you notice I didn't do the instant combo where I install reverse accounts, dedicate it, and then pop it to force the runner to lose credits. 2 reasons. Firstly, my opponent was nowhere near rich enough for that combo to have its full effect. And secondly, this was fine. This was basically the same as fast advancing and reverse accounts, because by forcing them, dragging them through my Thithonium, they've spent so much money, it was basically equivalent to them siphoning themselves. So I was happy with that, and now I'm going to drop the Batty in the remote, fetch an Atlas with my Atlas counter and go for it. So this is kind of like Titan Fast Advance when Atlas changed into another Atlas. This looked like a perfect opportunity to get my agenda points going, given that my opponent started that turn on 0 credits after trashing my reversed accounts. I knew they probably couldn't get in the remote. If they did, they would have to contend with the Batty. I knew they probably didn't have an indexing either, because if they did, they would have used it last turn. So I'm pretty happy with using my Atlas counter here, and now I'm going to score up my 4th point. Giving them 1 whole turn to set up though, but that's fine because I'm willing to give them a bit of setup or leeway to get their rig going as long as I get to match point. I need to threaten match point because this deck has a very interesting win condition from 4 agenda points. You can jam a food in the remote. If they don't check it, you play Red Planet Couriers and fast advance to victory. That is a threat they have to respect, and that's what I'm going to play. That's what I'm intending to play towards, because with an extra Atlas counter, I can fetch the Red Planet Couriers, which is usually a singleton in my deck, from anywhere in my R&D. So My opponent, instead of deciding to contest the remote since they didn't know what the upgrade was, went for an indexing which was fair game. I hope they didn't have it, but they did. So this could be really bad. Indexing mad dash is game here. All my agendas are 2 pointers. And even if they don't have the mad dash, if they find an agenda and get to 6 points, that's not good for me either. So this was a very nail-biting indexing for me. I was really hoping the next 5 cards wouldn't be agendas. We've seen quite a lot of agendas. Yeah, 9 points of agendas, and we still have 34 out of 49 cards in our deck. So hopefully R&D should be quite thin of agendas, which would be good because archives and HQ are empty, and I can use the next few turns to set up my centrals, get some advancements on my ice going, and that way I'll be able to threaten a Red Planet Courier's win. Speaking of HQ and Archives, my opponent spends the next 2 clicks running HQ and Archives, as you'll see soon. So thankfully, they're indexing with, there were no agendas at the top of the deck. This is good news. Now, they're running all 3 centrals. I would usually be afraid of Apocalypse here, but look at their rig. They have a Gordian Blade set up. They have Data Sucker counters going. This isn't an Apocalypse deck. I mean, come on, an Apocalypse deck wouldn't run Dig Deer. This is notoriety. The runner getting the match point isn't good, but hey, at least it's not an Apocalypse. This isn't an Apocalypse deck. I would usually be afraid of Apocalypse here. This isn't an Apocalypse deck. At least it's not an Apocalypse. Well, the game must go on, mustn't it? So I take my mandatory draw and play it out. I mean, there's not much of a game left, to be honest. If you look at my board, my ice, my advancements, I mean, yeah, you got me. You got me good. I had no ice on my freaking centrals. Oh look, it's a global food from the indexing. My opponent knows, just as well as I do, that the winning agenda is in my HQ, and there's nothing I can do about it, because the ice is a bloody Colossus. That's not going to keep him out. Yeah, they're on 4 points. There's a winning Atlas in the bin, and the global food in my HQ. That's more than enough points for my opponent to win. What's my out? They know that I have the food in there, thanks to the indexing. So I just draw. I'm going to pad my hand, such that the food is a 1-5 instead of a 1-4. To hit per HQ run. And of course my opponent knows this. They ram into my hand, they see the Colossus. They ram into my hand again. They see the Colossus. Well, I guess the Colossus is going to keep them from winning. It's not going on my HQ, but it's padding my HQ. They fetch the Atlas that I was supposed to over-advance last turn, and now I can get a bit of a respite. Firewall onto the food should be good enough to protect me for at least the next 2 turns. Firewall costs 9 to break with Inti, so even if my opponent knew that was a food in my remote, they can't get there right now. And with the hedge fund I played last click, I know that I can fortify the remote with a Colossus or another Firewall if need be, such that they can't get in again. Now my opponent sets up with another Hyperdriver and Index last click. What is this sorcery? I mean, I was gonna call my opponent a mad genius for completely catching me off guard with the Apocalypse, but indexing last click? I mean, if they didn't show the indexing, I probably wouldn't have Ice R&D next turn anyway. They would have gotten a free win. So, I have no idea what my opponent is doing here, but I guess they're gonna stack my deck in such a way that it's gonna be harder for me to... I don't know. You tell me, what's my opponent doing here? Because if there's an agenda that they're leaving on top, I'm gonna ice HQ. If there's no agendas on top, I'll be suspicious that my opponent left them on R&D. I'm gonna put the firewall on R&D. I have more than enough capability to defend one of my centrals along with my remote. So yeah, I am feeling okay about this. Even though the Apocalypse broke my back, at least my opponent is giving me a bit of an out. Sort of. I still have to get rid of the food and the remote, mind you. But well, at least the game's going to be made a bit easier. Let's see what my opponent gave me for my top deck. He gave me a what? When his credit pool is what? I mean, I've already embarrassed myself on the internet, by letting an Apocalypse fire with no central ice whatsoever, but was it really necessary to mock me like this? give me a Brian Stinson on the top of my deck and saying, hey, here you go, I think you need the 14 credits from the IPO. Really? I know I suck at this game. I know I'm not the best Netrunner in the world, but did you really have to do that? Fine, I mean, if you're giving me the Stinson, I guess I'll take it. Yeah, if you're gonna put your hand in the crocodile's mouth, it's gonna bite you, man. And supposedly, my opponent seems to have left an agenda as a second card on R&D because they are now trying to get into it. Don't forget, they did indexing the turn before, so on top of R&D, they know what that card is, and it seems like they want it. Unfortunately, they're not getting it. It's a hard end the wall, and the run with Firewall that takes, once again, 9 credits to break with Inti, and my opponent only has 3. I knew that even with the Hyperdriver, they would be really hard pressed to get into either R&D or my remote for the win, and so I can start building up again. Meanwhile, my opponent goes down to 0 again by playing double daily cast on the turn, ending the turn. So I top deck the Batty, and I see that's what they were going for. They were trying to deny me the Batty. Well, they can't anymore because now it's going in my secure remote with the Colossus. So no way they're getting in this remote now, and I have more than enough money to rest the Colossus and play the side game because I use Stinson last click to play another IPO. Again, punishing my opponent for ending their turn without enough cast. For ending their turn by going down to 0 by playing those casts. So I do have a stranglehold on my centrals for now. Now I don't. This is a very awkward situation. I played the dedication ceremony from hand on the R&D Firewall. The main intent for this is to ensure that my opponent doesn't get into R&D this turn. For another indexing, it's not going to happen. They are not going to run through the firewall twice with such an inefficient barrier breaker. And they are not going to get single accesses for cheap either. Unfortunately, I did not do enough forward planning here because clearly, as you see, all my opponent needs to do is to run HQ to win. This is not the position I want to be in. What I should have done was to actually not play the dedication ceremony and rely on the 1 in 2 chance of my opponent hitting the dedication ceremony every HQ run. With this setup, there's no way I can avoid losing the game. My opponent had the indexing lock on me for most of the game and managed to stack the agendas in such a way that they came too fast for me to clear. Even though my opponent has no business contesting my remote, I just couldn't deal with the fact that the agenda came at a time when my remote was occupied waiting for the food to be scored. By the time I realized an agenda was coming my way, it was too little, too late. Ultimately, that apocalypse proved too much for me to handle. I lost my Atlas token, I lost 2 agenda points in the remote Atlas, I lost my secure scoring remote, and last but not least, I lost every shred of my remaining dignity. That being said, I have to give a lot of credit to my opponent Pinsel. He made some very interesting choices during the game, sure, but there was one main motive behind giving me the Stinson on the indexing. Pinsel actually wanted to bury the Enderan Ice and the Colossus that he saw on indexing because he knew that it was going to be nearly impossible to contest these ice with his subpar breakers, which tend to be cheap and disposable to Apocalypse. So credit to him there, he knew that the agendas were going to come up sooner or later into my hand and he sniped them very well. Now, I would feel quite bitter about my loss, but thinking about it, Pinsel was actually the originator of the world's winning Wilfy CI deck. That's where it came from. And this BABW deck, having reverse accounts, being inspired directly from Wilfy CI deck, it only makes sense for it to come full circle and bite me in the butt. As the deck creator of the deck that inspired my deck, it was only fitting that he gave me a lesson on how to ice your centrals even against Haley. Are you entertained? I hope so. Thanks for watching and happy net running. I'll see you next time. Share of